It was just after midnight when the call came through the intercom. Code blue, incoming from paramedics. ETA 5 minutes. The words echoed through the quiet halls of St. Augustine Medical Center like a bell tolling in the dark. In the cardiac ICU, night shift nurse Laura Mitchell was charting vitals, sipping coffee gone cold, when the world around her snapped into motion. She'd been through countless emergencies before. Cardiac arrests, massive strokes, multi-organ failures. But this one would become the story she could never shake. The night that would change how she saw life, death, and everything in between. The double doors of the trauma bay burst open. Paramedics rushed in, sweat shining under fluorescent lights, a lifeless man on the gurney. 47-year-old male, found unresponsive at home, down for at least 15 minutes before CPR started. The monitor screamed flatline. The team surrounded him. Compressions, intubation, defibrillation. Clear! The man's body jolted. Still a systole. Again. Clear? Again. Still nothing. Minutes stretched into an eternity, measured only by the relentless rhythm of hands pounding his chest. Laura's mind raced. Too long without oxygen, she thought. Too long. Then a sound. A faint blip on the monitor. "We've got a pulse," someone shouted. A collective exhale filled the room. After 20 minutes of fighting, his heart was beating again. His name, they learned, was Daniel Harper. Father of 2, a construction manager, healthy by most accounts. But as they wheeled him into the ICU, his pupils barely reacted. And his skin carried that waxy pallor that nurses recognize too well. The in-between look, the one that hovers just this side of death. Laura adjusted his ventilator tubing, secured IV lines, and set his sedation drip. Machines hummed in low mechanical unison, their steady beeping a fragile reassurance that life, at least in body, was still present. His wife, Karen Harper, arrived not long after, mascara streaked, voice trembling. "Please, just tell me he's going to wake up." Laura couldn't lie. "He's stable for now," she said softly, the only truth she could offer. The hours that followed passed in slow motion. The room glowed faint blue under the monitors. Laura worked methodically, checking vitals, adjusting oxygen, documenting every fluctuation in heart rate, all while a quiet unease pressed against her chest. She'd seen countless patients in comas, many who never returned. But something about Daniel felt different, though she couldn't have said why. Maybe it was the faint warmth in his fingers when she checked for reflexes, or the way his breathing seemed to sync faintly with the rhythm of her own. At 3:42 a.m., as Laura watched the ventilator breathe for him, she found herself whispering, "Hang in there, Daniel. You're not done yet." It was instinct, the kind of small human ritual that nurses do even when science tells them it doesn't matter. But for her, it did. By sunrise, Daniel Harper's body was alive, his heart beat steady. His brain, however, told a different story, still and silent. The attending physician summed it up during rounds. Severe hypoxic brain injury. The odds of meaningful recovery are low. The words hung heavy in the sterile air. As the team left the room, Laura lingered by his bedside, eyes tracing the faint rise and fall of his chest beneath the white hospital sheet. The man lying before her was suspended in that strange space where medicine meets mystery. His pulse said he was alive, but everything else suggested he wasn't. That night, as the ICU lights dimmed and the hospital settled into its familiar nocturnal rhythm, Laura couldn't shake a single haunting question. What happens to a mind that's been gone for so long? And though she didn't know it yet, Daniel Harper's story, and her part in it, was only just beginning. The morning after Daniel Harper's collapse dawned gray and quiet over St. Augustine Medical Center. Through the ICU's narrow windows, a thin strip of light pressed against the glass, fighting its way into a place built to defy the night. Machines clicked and hissed in their steady rhythm, a mechanical orchestra of fragile life. For the staff, it was just another shift. But for Laura Mitchell, standing by Daniel's bed, something about this case felt heavier, like the air itself carried the weight of an unanswered question. On paper, Daniel's prognosis was grim. Laura's voice, steady and calm, guides us through the science. When the heart stops, the brain loses oxygen. After 5 minutes, neurons begin to die. After 10, the damage becomes catastrophic. After 20, the person you knew, the voice, the memories, the spark, rarely returns. Daniel had been gone for nearly that long. His EEG, the test that records electrical activity in the brain, showed only faint, irregular flickers. The doctors called it minimal activity, the kind of reading that suggests the brain is surviving, not living. Laura explains it simply. Anoxic brain injury, she says, that means the brain was starved of oxygen. Think of it like a house losing power. You can turn the lights back on, but that doesn't mean everything inside still works. Rounds began at 9 a.m. The attending neurologist, Dr. Patel, reviewed the data with the detached precision of someone who'd seen too many of these cases. "We'll monitor for 72 hours, he said, "but we need to prepare the family for a likely non-recovery." Karen Harper sat in silence, her hands locked together, eyes fixed on the floor. She nodded, as though understanding, but her trembling said otherwise. As the day went on, the ICU settled into its familiar rhythm. Nurses adjusting IV drips, ventilators sighing, alarms chirping faintly like restless birds. Laura checked Daniel's pupils, performed reflex tests, and documented each response, or lack thereof. Everything followed the pattern of a man whose body was sustained by machines, whose consciousness had vanished into silence. And yet, something about that silence wasn't still. It began subtly. Small, involuntary twitches in Daniel's fingers. A flutter of eyelids that seemed too deliberate, too timely to be random. Reflexes, the team called them. Posturing, one resident noted clinically. But Laura wasn't convinced. She'd seen reflexes before, spasms, jerks, meaningless motion. This felt different. It was as if something inside him was trying to surface to remind them that he was still there. That night, while updating his chart, Laura found herself lingering again by his bed. The steady tone of the heart monitor pulsed softly in the dark. She spoke to him quietly, half out of habit, half out of hope. "Your wife's here every morning, Daniel. She keeps saying you're strong. I think she's right." For a moment, just a moment, she thought she saw his pulse quicken on the monitor. Barely, almost imperceptibly, but enough to make her stop. She leaned closer. "Daniel, can you hear me?" No response. Just the rhythmic hiss of the ventilator and the soft glow of machines. Still, the feeling stayed with her, a faint stirring of something beyond medical explanation. A spark under the surface, waiting for air, and though no one else could see it yet, Laura Mitchell was certain of one thing. This story wasn't finished. 3 days passed in the same quiet rhythm. The machines, the steady beeping, the whisper of footsteps across the polished ICU floor. For most of the staff, Daniel Harper's case had settled into routine observation. But for Laura Mitchell, each shift brought a strange sense of anticipation, like standing at the edge of something she couldn't name. His vitals were stable, his brain scans unchanged. Everything said he was gone. Yet, deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel was still listening. That third evening, as a thunderstorm rolled in from the coast, the air inside the ICU felt thick, almost electric. Outside, lightning flashed through the narrow windows, throwing streaks of white across Daniel's motionless body. Laura was finishing her rounds, the rain tapping softly against the glass, when she reached his bedside to check his IV line. She adjusted the tubing gently, and that's when it happened. His hand moved. At first, she thought she imagined it. A slight brush of his fingertips against her wrist. Reflex, she told herself. They happen all the time. But then it happened again. A firmer touch, almost as if his fingers were trying to close around her hand. Laura froze. The air in her lungs stalled. "Daniel?" she whispered. "If you can hear me, move your hand again." Nothing. She waited. 10 seconds, maybe more. The sound of the monitors amplifying every beat of her heart. Then a faint tightening. The smallest, most deliberate squeeze. Her breath caught. Within seconds, she called for the on-call physician. Tests were ordered immediately. Neurological checks, reflex exams, pain stimuli, all standard protocol. Every result came back the same, no measurable signs of consciousness. The doctor's expression was clinical, unmoved. "Muscle memory," he said. "It's common after this kind of injury." But Laura wasn't convinced. The motion she felt wasn't random. It was responsive, purposeful, real. Later that night, she sat in the nurse's break room, staring at her reflection in the vending machine glass. Rain pounded outside. The storm mirrored the unease twisting inside her. She'd spent nearly 2 decades in the ICU, watching life fade in sterile silence. But this felt different. What if, she thought, we're wrong about what it means to be gone? Back at Daniel's bedside, the lights were dimmed. The storm's rumble echoed through the building, a low, constant hum. She spoke softly, the way one might speak to someone who's half asleep. "You're safe, Daniel. You're in the hospital. We're taking care of you." And then, impossibly, the heart monitor's rhythm quickened, just a fraction, syncing with her voice, steadying as she spoke his name. For a long moment she stood frozen in place, staring at the green line on the screen dancing in gentle waves. No one else saw it. No one else would believe it. But Laura knew. Somewhere behind the stillness, beneath the damaged neurons and flat EEG lines, a flicker of Daniel Harper remained. Outside, the storm broke open, thunder echoing through the night. And Laura whispered to herself, "He's still in there." She didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning of something that would blur every line she thought existed between life, death, and whatever comes after. 2 weeks had passed since Daniel Harper was first brought into the ICU, and though the medical chart still labeled him unresponsive, Laura Mitchell had stopped believing it. Every night, she found herself drawn to his bedside, long after her rounds were finished. Something about him felt present, not in the measurable way that machines could detect, but in the quiet, almost sacred stillness of the room. She'd begun talking to him regularly, not out of procedure, but out of instinct. "Good morning, Daniel," she'd say while adjusting his monitors. "It's another rainy day out there." She'd read from the worn Bible that his wife Karen left on the table beside the bed, sometimes passages about healing, sometimes about faith. Other times, she'd hum softly to fill the silence. The other nurses teased her kindly. "Talking to your ghost patient again?" one joked during a late-night shift. Laura smiled, pretending it didn't get to her. But deep down, she didn't think of Daniel as a ghost. To her, he was caught somewhere in between, not here. Not gone, but suspended in a place medicine couldn't chart. And then, one night, something happened that would silence the jokes forever. It was after midnight, and the ICU was unusually quiet. The hall lights dimmed, casting long shadows over the monitors. Laura stood by Daniel's bed, checking his ventilator settings one last time before her break. That's when she noticed it. A single tear glistening at the corner of his eye. She leaned closer. Then another, rolling slowly down his temple, soaking into the white pillow beneath him. Her heart leapt. She checked his vitals and saw it. His heart rate was climbing, his breathing irregular. But he wasn't in distress. It wasn't pain, it was emotion. Reflex tears, she knew, didn't do this. They didn't cause heart rhythms to change or blood pressure to spike. She whispered, "Daniel, can you hear me?" No answer, but his tears kept falling, his pulse still racing. Within moments, she called the team. The room flooded with light and urgency. A physician, 2 residents, a respiratory therapist. They examined him, adjusted settings, checked for any medical trigger. Nothing. Every test result was stable, every parameter normal. The doctors looked at each other, perplexed. "Probably just autonomic activity," one said finally, shrugging. But Laura saw what they couldn't. The unmistakable look of awareness. When the team left, Laura stayed. The room fell quiet again, except for the faint sound of rain tapping the window. She reached for his hand, spoke softly. "It's okay, Daniel. You're safe." The monitor steadied, his pulse slowing as if soothed by her voice. Later, sitting alone in the dim nurse's station, she tried to put words to what she had just witnessed. Reflexes don't weep. Machines don't respond to names. Yet Daniel had done both. In her heart, Laura knew she had just glimpsed something extraordinary, the faint outline of consciousness returning from the dark. From that night on, she treated Daniel not as a patient in a coma, but as someone fighting his way back, someone lost between 2 worlds, searching for a way home. It was the 17th day after Daniel Harper's heart had stopped. The ICU, as always, was still and sterile, the steady hum of machines filling the silence between breaths. Outside, dawn crept over the horizon. Pale gold light filtering through the blinds, spilling across white sheets and stainless steel. For most of the staff, it was just another morning. For Laura Mitchell, it would become the one she would never forget. She began her shift like any other. Vitals check, medication logs, patient notes. When she reached Daniel's bed, she paused, as she always did, taking a moment just to look at him. His face was peaceful, almost serene, as though sleeping. She adjusted his IV line, straightened the tubes along his ventilator, and whispered, "Good morning, Daniel. It's another sunrise. You made it through the night?" Then, without warning, his eyelids fluttered. Laura froze. She leaned closer. The movement was subtle. One flicker, then another, then his eyes opened fully. For a brief, impossible second, their gazes met. The faintest glint of awareness crossed his face, fragile as a candle flame in the dark. "Daniel?" she whispered, her voice trembling. His lips parted. The sound that came out was barely audible, more breath than word. But she heard it clearly. "I was there, but not here." Her heart pounded so loudly she could hear it in her ears. She hit the call button. "Doctor to ICU, bed 14 now." Within seconds, the room filled with bodies. Doctors, nurses, respiratory staff. The quiet hum of the morning erupted into chaos once again. Dr. Patel hurried in, disbelief on his face. "He's awake?" Laura nodded, unable to speak. They ran tests immediately. Reflexes, pupils, EEG, blood work, everything. What they found made no sense. Daniel was responding to commands. He could track voices, move his fingers, even mouth words. His brain activity, once nearly flat, now showed normal patterns, slowly rebuilding themselves. It was as though the lights had come back on in a house long abandoned, one room at a time. When his wife, Karen, arrived moments later, she stopped in the doorway and collapsed into tears. Daniel turned his head toward her, slow, deliberate, purposeful. "Hey," he rasped, voice cracking like something reborn. Karen ran to him, clutching his hand, sobbing into the sheets. The staff stood silent, watching something that defied every chart, every medical explanation. As the hours passed, his lucidity sharpened. And with that clarity came memories. Memories no one expected him to have. He described the chaos of the ER that first night, the frantic voices, the sound of the defibrillator pads being charged, the smell of antiseptic in the air. He told them how he'd seen Laura standing beside him, whispering, "Hang in there, Daniel. You're not done yet." His words left her speechless. He even remembered a night she'd sat reading to him from his wife's Bible. "You said, 'We miss you, Daniel,'" he murmured, tears filling his eyes. "I heard it." Every word. The staff exchanged uneasy glances. None of it should have been possible. His EEG had shown no measurable consciousness. His body had been unresponsive. And yet, he had remembered everything. Later that evening, as the ward quieted, Laura sat alone at the nurse's station, staring down the long hallway that led to Daniel's room. Her thoughts were tangled between medicine and mystery. I don't know how to explain it, she whispered to herself, but I felt it. The moment he came back. She didn't call it a miracle, not yet. But deep down, Laura knew she had witnessed something rare, something sacred. The moment life itself had crossed back over the line. As Daniel Harper's recovery continued, the hospital buzzed with quiet disbelief. Patients came and went, new emergencies replaced old ones, but whispers about the man who came back rippled through every corridor. Doctors cited it as a statistical anomaly. Nurses called it a miracle they couldn't chart. But Laura Mitchell, who had been there through every heartbeat and silence, wanted to know what Daniel remembered. Not just medically, but experientially. What happened to him during those 17 lost days when his mind was supposed to be gone? It was late afternoon when she finally asked. The room was calm, sunlight cutting soft gold lines across the floor. Daniel sat upright now, pale but alert. IV still in place, oxygen tubes draped loosely around his face. His voice, though fragile, carried a strange clarity. "I remember everything," he said. "Not like a dream, like I was there watching it all." He described floating above his own body, detached, yet conscious. He said he could see the doctors pressing on his chest, the paddles striking his skin, sparks of light bursting behind closed eyes. He saw Laura, her face calm but determined, her lips moving as she whispered words of encouragement he shouldn't have been able to hear. Then, he said, there was silence. "I wasn't in a tunnel," he explained. "There wasn't any light or darkness. It was just still, a kind of peace I can't explain. No pain, no time. I remember thinking I had a choice, to keep going or to let go. And something, or someone, told me it wasn't my time." Laura listened, torn between skepticism and awe. She'd read about near-death experiences, known in medicine as NDEs, vivid perceptions reported by patients who had been clinically dead or close to it. Science offered theories: oxygen deprivation, chemical surges in the brain, hallucinations caused by trauma. But none of those explained how Daniel had known things he couldn't possibly have seen or heard. She later compared his account to the medical records. His descriptions matched specific details: the timing of the code, the attending physician's words, even the sound of the rain outside that night. All of it accurate. When she asked how that was possible, Daniel smiled faintly. "Maybe consciousness doesn't live where we think it does," he said. "Maybe it's not in the brain at all." His words lingered with her long after she left the room. For the first time in her career, Laura found herself confronting something medicine couldn't quantify. Science could explain the body, the heart's rhythm, the neurons firing, the oxygen that keeps us tethered to this world. But it couldn't explain that. The awareness that seemed to drift beyond the reach of machines. As the sun dipped behind the city skyline, Laura stood at the ICU window and whispered, "Where do we go when everything stops?" She had no answer. Only the certainty that Daniel had gone somewhere, and somehow returned. Months later, the ICU at St. Augustine felt almost ordinary again. The alarms still sang their metallic chorus, nurses still moved with quiet efficiency, and lives still hung in balance between the familiar hum of machines. But for Laura Mitchell, nothing about her work felt the same. Not since Daniel Harper. He returned one spring afternoon. No wheelchair, no tubes, no monitors. Just a simple man walking under his own strength, carrying a small bouquet of flowers that looked almost too bright for the sterile hallway. The staff stopped what they were doing. Conversations froze mid-sentence. Daniel smiled as he stepped into the ward, his eyes clear, his steps steady. It was as if life itself had walked back into the place it had once left behind. Laura turned, and their eyes met. For a second, neither spoke. Then Daniel crossed the distance between them and wrapped her in a trembling hug. "Thank you," he whispered, "for talking to me. I heard you. Every word." She didn't realize she was crying until she felt the tears on her face. Around them, the ICU seemed to hold its breath. The same space that had once echoed with the sound of flatlines now filled with laughter, relief, and something sacred. Later that evening, after Daniel left, Laura sat alone at her desk, staring at his old chart. Page after page of cold data, numbers, readings, and lines of text that once declared his chances non-existent. Yet here he was, alive, conscious, whole. The medical records ended where the mystery began. She opened his EEG scans, the near flat lines, the silence of a brain that should have meant the end of self. But she remembered the way his fingers had moved, the way his tears had fallen, the way his pulse had responded to her voice, and she knew, deep down, that something had stirred long before the machines had registered it. In a voiceover that carries both awe and quiet humility, Laura reflects, "We save lives here every day. But that night, I learned we don't truly understand what life even is. We measure heartbeats, brainwaves, blood oxygen, but there's something else. Something you can't graph or record. And whatever that is, it was still alive inside Daniel. The final scene fades from the ICU, from glowing monitors and quiet hallways, to dawn breaking outside the hospital. Light spills over the horizon, warm and golden, chasing away the night. Laura's voice returns, soft, reverent, carrying the question that will never leave her. Maybe some hearts stop beating, but not all of them stop living. And with that, the screen fades to black, the hum of machines lingering like an echo of the unexplained.